Today's tutorial is part 1 of a 2-part series, going through the retouch for an editorial style shoot. So let's go ahead and get started. I've just opened this image up. I haven't done any retouching to this image prior to the video, so we'll be looking at this for the first time together. Now I have made some notes just a few seconds ago, and we'll go ahead and take a look at what we'll be doing in the first part of this video as well as in the second part. So let's go ahead and turn on this note. So the first thing we're going to do is some background work. Now you can see that I've circled some areas that may be problem areas, and you may not even see or be able to see what's wrong. But if I turn on this curves adjustment layer, now we can see a lot of these problem areas. And I like to do this, I like to take care of every little detail. So even things that you might not see on screen, I recommend taking care of them. Things might look differently on different screens, especially if you're working on a laptop, the angle that you're viewing on. So when it goes to print, you want to make sure that everything is taken care of. So we'll do a lot of our background work. Let's go ahead and turn that off. And we'll also take care of some of these problem areas. So removing this tag, fixing some of this fringe, pushing in the sleeve here, correcting some of the areas where maybe the fringe isn't as even, if we can, pushing this in and just correcting some of these things. Now, a lot of the things that we're doing in terms of liquifying are not to make the model look thinner. It's really just to enhance the clothing and give a better fit. So even pushing in, say, a waistline, in actuality, this is the line of the clothes. So we just want to have a better fit and show off the clothing a little bit better. I also want to note that things like liquifying, so the tassels, those sorts of things, the tag, I would do that first. But the actual liquifying type things, so let's hide this for a second. So pushing this in, straightening out this arm, I would usually do that last. I'm kind of putting these together so that they're in similar groups for the tutorial. But if I were retouching, I would do the liquifying last. The reason being is, as we're going through most of our steps, say our skin retouching, all of those things, let's say we liquify a little bit too much and we send it off to the client and they say, hey, that's too much, you've gone too far, can you just pull that back a little bit? Well, no matter what, we're going to say, yeah, sure, no problem. But if we've gone too far and we've done that first, well, we might have a lot of work that we have to redo instead of doing that last. So let's also look now at what we'll do in steps 2A and 2B. So 2A will be a lot of our general things, so our skin retouching, our dodging and burning. A lot of these things are the steps that I put together in our 5 final steps of any retouch video. Then we'll look at our levels, we'll do our color matching from the face to the legs, we'll do any color toning that we decide to do, and then any post sharpening that we decide to do. Levels, color matching are things that I would always do. Toning really depends on the image, and we'll see how far we decide to push this, if any. Looking at it and just the style of the image, I'll probably just do a little bit of color toning into the shadows and nothing more than that. And then we'll go into our sharpening. Okay, so let's go ahead and start with our background work. I'm going to go ahead and group our step here, step A, or step 2, A and B. And then I'm going to go ahead and just remind myself what we're doing, looking at the background and turning on our curves. Now this is going to be a 3-step process. First, I'll do some healing to some of these larger areas. So let's zoom in. So anywhere we see some wrinkles, I'll probably be using the healing brush to remove those larger issues. And then we'll do some dodging and burning to kind of fill in where we have the shift in values. You can see this kind of the dip in the paper where we have a lighter area and a darker area. And by filling those in, it'll start to flatten out the paper. And then the final step will be to use a frequency separation to smooth out any tones that are left over. So let's go ahead and create a new layer and grab our healing brush there and remove some of these. Now, as I go through this tutorial, since this is the first time doing it, a lot of the things I'll be talking through, some of the things will be more tedious. So when we get to those parts, I'll just fast forward so not to bore you guys. But let's go ahead and take care of the healing. Now I am on current and below with my healing brush. I'm choosing Alt to sample the areas that I want to affect. And I've already made a mistake. I'm healing above my curves layer. So let's start that over. And make sure we're working underneath our curves. The reason being is that it's going to tone for the curves, and when we turn it off, it might not look good, so we'll make sure that we are current and below and we're not above the curves layer. So let's try that again. Okay, so that's going to take care of most of our wrinkles, and now we can go into some dodging and burning. So I'm going to go into my action for my dodge and burn, and I use curves for dodge and burn. Nothing secret about it. It's just 2 curve layers. One is dodging, one is burning, so I'll show you the dodge layer, just going a little bit lighter, the burn layer just going a little bit darker. I have those masks inverted so that I don't see them, and then I'm just lightening and darkening the areas that I want to work. Now, again, I'm working with a Wacom tablet, so that gives me a little bit more control. You may see me not change my brush size quite as often as you would need to. If you are not using a tablet, I highly recommend you get one, but also if you're not, you're going to need to change your brush size to match the area that you're working on. Otherwise, it's just not going to look as clean. But by using the tablet, then I have pressure sensitivity. So let's start with some burning. So I'm going to look at the areas that are a little bit too dark. So wherever I see a shadow next to a highlight, I'm going to start filling those in. So here we go. And let me get my flow down to about 3%. And leave my opacity at 100%. We've corrected a lot of our inconsistencies in the background with our dodge and burn. A lot of times when you're doing this, it won't look like you're really making that much of a change. Also note that my flow went down to 1% and my opacity down to 73%. The reason so is that it was too quick of a change. And reality is, remember, we're working at a very macro type level because we've taken these curves all the way down so we can see these details. So 3% was actually way too quick of a change, and even 1% at 100% opacity was too quick. So I turned that down a little bit, and if we look just at our before and after, you can see we've been able to even out a lot of these areas. So before and after. All right, so let's go ahead and close that. I want to hide our steps for now. Just put that into our group. Now we're going to do a frequency separation. So I'm going to turn that off for a second, and I'll create a stamp visible layer. So I'll create a new layer, Command Option Shift E to create that stamp visible. And then I'll run my frequency separation action. And I've gone through the frequency separation in detail in previous videos, so if you're not familiar, definitely go to the YouTube channel and check out some of those earlier videos on how to do that. So now I have my low layer, my high layer, and I'm going to blur. Now I'm blurring for the background, not for the subject, so the number that I pick for the blur may be a little bit different than in part 2 when I'm doing the skin retouching. So I'm going to go to Filter, Blur, Gaussian blur. I really want most of this to go to the tone, so I don't need to blur all too much. We'll go about there. There shouldn't be that much texture really, if any, in your high layer if you've done this correctly. That's a part of the reason why we took out the wrinkles the way that we did, so that we could separate that and not have to worry about that being on a high layer. But let's go into Image, Apply Image. We'll choose our low layer, invert, add, there we go. Change this blending mode to linear light. All right, and then we'll be painting in here. Now, the thing is, I'm going to be using the paintbrush, and there isn't a current and below option. I could use the stamp, the clone stamp, if I wanted to leave this curve on the whole time. So just be aware of that. If you're using the clone stamp tool when you're painting, then that's great. You can use the current and below. But if you're going to use the paintbrush like I'm going to be, then you're going to have to turn this off every time you sample. So for instance, if I want to blend right here, I'm going to turn off the curve, grab my sample point so I get that color, and then I'll paint in. And I'll even turn this back on so I can kind of see what's going on. And I can paint in to smooth that out. Okay, let's look and see what happens if you do that the wrong way. So let's say I leave this curve on and then I start to paint. What happens now is that everything is going to get darker. And you can see this corner here getting darker than it was, and that's because we had this curve on. So it's actually sampling something that's darker than it already is. So it's painting down on a darker gray color, and then the curve is being applied on top of that. So we don't want to do that. We want to make sure if we're using our brush that every time we sample, we turn that curve layer off. All right, so I'm going to go ahead and fast forward as I do some of this painting. We've smoothed out most of these tones, and I'm going to go ahead and close this here, turn that back on, and just before and after, before and after. And it's not a huge change, it's subtle, but it just improves the quality of the gradation of value. So we don't have many big shifts. I'm not trying to completely change this image. I like this shift of value from whiter to a grayer tone, but I just want to make that transition smoother. So again, before and after, you can see we just smooth some of that out. You also probably notice, and if you've retouched, you've seen the same thing. If we really zoom in, that it isn't perfectly seamless. So you have these kind of patterns. Patterns really are banding in your image. We're not be able to fix that with what we're doing. That's always going to be there. The way around that, or how we're going to fix that, is going to be our last step of our retouch, is when we add some noise. The noise is going to help blend those tones. So this is looking good for now, and we can move into part B. So I'm going to hide or delete this curve. I don't need it anymore. I'm going to create another stamp. Our file is starting to get large. It's 1.4 gigs. So I'm going to create a stamp, and I'm going to delete everything else underneath it. Okay, so I've deleted everything that we don't need for now. You can see our file size has gone down from 1.4 gigs down to 350 megs, significantly smaller. I also saved in between, so I like to keep all of my steps. So I resave this. I have all that information saved. I'm not just going to dump it and lose that just in case I need it. Now I can move into the second part of this part of the video. So all of our problem areas. Removing the tag, adding these tassels, liquifying, that sort of thing is what we'll take care of. And it really doesn't matter what order we do it. I think I'm going to start with trying to add these tassels back in. And I'll try a few different things, and we'll kind of see what works. I think I'm going to start with the clone stamp. So let's create a new layer. Go ahead and zoom in and see if we can't correct some of these issues. Yeah, so we have this gap here, and it doesn't look great. We want the clothing to look as good as it can be since it's a fashion editorial. So let's hide step 1B and see what we can do. Okay, so I think we filled in that gap there. So just before and after, before and after. And let's see if we can't do the same thing on the other side. The other thing that we need to be mindful of here is this shadow. So we need to see how that comes into play. We might have to fix that either now or later on in our frequency separation, but we want things to look realistic. So if there's a shadow going across here, and then we add tassels in, well then obviously that shadow wouldn't be there anymore. So let's see how this looks. Okay, so I think that looks better. So before and after, and before and after. It's a very small, minor part in the actual image, so it's going to look fine here if we even zoom in. It's very unnoticeable. This is a pretty seamless transition here, as well as in here. kind of the nature of this helps us out a lot. It's a bit random, so it's harder. I think it's harder to recognize patterns, so even though they may be reoccurring. And so let's look at where we have some reoccurring patterns here and here. They're hard to spot. Now, if it was very obvious, say like we had the same curve over and over again, or this same thing over and over again, then you'd want to break that up, just so you know that it isn't clearly retouched. You want it to look like it naturally happened that way. I'm also going to clean this up right here. That looks good. Now let's move on to, let's go ahead and fix this here. And this is going to require a little bit of extra work. We want to create a really nice clean selection in here so that we can remove this here and not affect our arm. So let's go ahead and create our selection. I'll do that on a new layer. And let's see if our magnetic lasso tool can help us out, or if we're going to have to use our pen tool. Prefer to use my lasso tool if I can. It's going to save me a little bit of time. Okay, so we have our selection. It's a good starting point. I want to save this selection, so create a new layer and add a mask. We could also do that with paths if we wanted to. This is just a little bit quicker since it's right in front of me. And now I know I can always reselect this selection by hitting Command and clicking on the mask itself, so I can get that selection back. Okay, so this certainly is not perfect. You can see that there are tassels here. There would probably be some coming underneath here. And so that's not how I'm going to leave it. I've corrected this problem on the arm, which is great. But now I can mask out some of this if I need to. I can also clone stamp some of these back in so that this looks a little bit more natural. So let's go ahead and do that. I'll add a mask to layer 7, which is this stamp layer. And then we'll just mask some of this out. So I'll grab my brush tool. I'll choose black, which is going to hide my mask. And we'll come in here and see if we can make this look a little bit more natural. There's also a leftover tassel right here that we'll need to fix. This edge does not look really nice. You can see that this is a nice soft edge and this isn't. So we want to correct this as much as possible. Okay, so that looks good for now. I'll probably need to do a little bit more work and just clean up some of these edges, but I don't want to bore you guys too much. So I'm still not super happy with just this line here. So you can see this kind of a soft edge naturally from the shirt itself, and this is a little bit harder of an edge. There's a few things I can do looking at my masking, liquifying. I'm also going to need to heal this section here where there's a tassel left over, and I'm also going to look at this here. But let's go over to our next major problem area, which is our tag, and see how we can correct this. So I'll create a new layer, and we will stamp out the first parts of this. So a lot of this is pretty obvious what needs to go. And let's start with with a selection. So I'll use my magnetic lasso tool and select around the tag. And then I'll use my stamp to get rid of the major area here. I'll create a new layer. And now what I'm going to do is use my stamp tool to add tassels back in. So similar to what we were doing down here at the bottom of this dress, adding tassels in, is I'm going to cover this up. So instead of trying to just remove this with white, I want it to look realistic so we can follow the form that's happening here. I think if we remove all of this, it's not going to look as realistic. So I'm going to first start with trying to paint some of these back in and see what that looks like. I think that looks a lot better. And we can look at our before and after. So there's with the tag and without. Looks a little bit cleaner. So before and after. And we may look at this edge here and try to make it look a little bit more natural. But now let's see if we can remove this tassel that's kind of going the wrong way as well. So let's group this and create a new layer. And I'm going to go back to my stamp tool. This should be a slightly easier fix, so we can just cover parts of this up. We can match up our lines. So linking that up there. Okay, so I think that just about does it. And so before and after, before and after. So let's go ahead and zoom out and see what else we need to fix. So we've corrected this guy here, we've corrected this, removed the tag, remove this cross tassel, fix this. We want to add one more tassel in here and then we can get into our Liquify. So let's give that a try. Okay, so I think that looks better. Just kind of fills that in a little bit. So before and after, before and after. All right, so I think that looks good. So I'll create a stamp visible layer. Now we can go ahead and start liquifying to even out some of the lines in here. So helping with the fit of the dress, evening out the lines in the arm and on the wrists. So let's create a copy of layer 14. So this will be our base layer. And I'm going to go into Filter, Liquify. And we're going to tackle one thing at a time. I'm not going to attempt to do everything at once. So let's go ahead and just kind of push this in a little bit. Just one little push at a time. Okay, so let's see what that looks like. So a subtle change. And I'll create a copy of that. And then Filter, Liquify. Oh, it looks a little bit better. Just even out that line a little bit. Let's go back and Filter, Liquify. See if we can't push this out a tiny bit. Okay, that looks better. There we go. So before and after. And let's see what else. Let's push in the sleeve right here. Create a copy. Filter, Liquify. Okay. And now we can look at the lines of our dress. Create a copy. Filter, Liquify. Before and after, before and after. So not trying to make a major change, and I actually want to give another swipe at this. So I like this. This is pretty subtle. I think I went a little bit too far here, so I'll mask that out. And this is the benefit of working in steps. By not doing this all at once, it's easy to just mask something out if I don't like it and go back and fix it. Before and after, before and after. All right, so I think that just about does it. So let's look and make sure we hit all our areas. So we kind of push that in a little bit. We push this guy in a little bit. Fixed our arm line here. So everything looks good. So I think that just about concludes part one of our two-part tutorial on retouching an editorial image. In part two, again, we'll look at our dodging and burning, so fixing some areas like this, evening out tones, doing some skin retouching, as well as some positive dodging and burning to add some contrast. And then we'll look at our finishing touches, our levels, our color matching, our toning, and our sharpening.